Welcome back, everyone. For those of you who are joining us for this panel for the first time today, welcome. For those of you who've been participating in today's very full set of activities, thank you for participating in what has been a really consequential day here at the Garden. My name is Jennifer Bernstein. I'm the president and CEO here, and this is our final panel. I'm delighted to be here to present it in partnership with the Bezos Earth Fund. So welcome to Supertrees for a Sustainable Future, where we will discuss the power and the potential of native trees. And so to get us started, I'm going to welcome our colleague, Emily Averna, who is the Associate Director of Landscape Restoration at the Bezos Earth Fund. Emily.
Hi, everybody. It's so nice to be here, and it's such a treat to end Climate Week this way, talking about one of my very favorite topics, trees. And there's no more perfect venue that we could ask for than this beautiful botanic garden to have this discussion. So thank you so much to our hosts. My name's Emily Averna. As was mentioned, I work at the Bezos Earth Fund, and I lead our landscape restoration program. The Bezos Earth Fund is really focused on tackling the kind of climate and nature crises that we face. And my colleagues spend a lot of time on the hunt for innovative technologies and new approaches that can help us address these issues. But I feel like I have a real leg up over a lot of my colleagues because I get to focus on the perfect technology that was made by nature, a tree. So as we know, trees are so great. They soak up carbon, they pump out oxygen, they provide habitat for wildlife, they purify the air that we breathe, the water that we drink. They boost soil nutrition, and they also provide products that can allow people to generate an income. It's no wonder then that so many people around the world are hard at work using trees to restore the vitality and their health to landscapes. And in fact, 60 countries, more than 60 countries around the world have made tree-based restoration pledges. However, if we are going to meet those pledges, fulfill those commitments, we need to do a few things. And the first of those things is we need to get a lot more seeds, a lot more seedlings, and quickly. And in particular, we need to get a hold of a lot more native tree seeds and seedlings. I said earlier that nature has made the perfect technology, and that's true. But even nature needs a little bit of help. And that's the topic of our panel today. New applied research to native species, doing things like selective breeding, cloning, grafting. These improvements can actually make native tree species that grow faster, taller, and be more productive. And this is really important because we want to make it easier for farmers, ranchers, nonprofits, and communities to use native tree species when they're fulfilling these really critical restoration goals. So today you're going to hear a few things on this topic. You'll hear a case from Brazil and a case from Colombia. In Brazil, we're going to have a few speakers who talk about a really ambitious program to do research and development to improve native species to meet the country's restoration targets. We'll hear first from Miguel, who will speak about this national program that Brazil has launched, giving a sense of its vision, where it's been and where it's going. We'll then hear from Daniel Piotto, a professor who's leading a lot of the research that's being discussed today. And then we'll hear from Fernando Visser from a Brazilian restoration company called ReGreen to show how this research is being applied right now on business campuses to drive business decisions. And then we'll turn to Colombia, and we'll hear from our colleague and co-host Mauricio, who will talk about the really critical role that botanical gardens play, not only in driving this research agenda, but connecting it to people through the power and the charisma and the experiences that botanical gardens can provide. So our goal today is that you leave here feeling as excited and inspired about the power and potential of these native super trees as we do. And to kick us off, I'll invite Mauricio to the stage to talk a bit about what are native super trees before we dive into these two case examples. Thanks.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this panel. As I mentioned this morning, this is a super panel on super trees for a sustainable future. I am Mauricio Diaz-Granados, Chief Science Officer at the New York Botanical Garden, and I have had the great opportunity to moderate, to have the opportunity to moderate this panel with an outstanding group of panelists, each of whom brings a wealth of knowledge and experience. We are going to have presentations first, and then we will join the panel. But I want to then talk a little bit about my insights about what we call supertrees. So biodiversity, as we all know, plays a fundamental role in enabling ecosystems to function and thrive, making it a critical enabler of climate mitigation and adaptation. Diverse ecosystems are more resilient to environmental stressors like droughts, floods, and shifting climate patterns. Healthy forests, wetlands, and grasslands, all of them rich in biodiversity, capture carbon, regulate water cycles, and act as natural buffers against climate impacts. By conserving and restoring biodiversity, we not only preserve the ecological services that these systems provide, but also we equip ourselves with the tools to mitigate climate change and adapt to its inevitable consequences. In this context, protecting biodiversity becomes an indispensable part of any climate strategy, and we've been emphasizing this, the interconnection between climate change and biodiversity all day. Trees, especially native trees, are at the heart of both climate mitigation and sustainable economic development. Forests act as massive carbon sinks, absorbing a substantial amount of CO2 that we emit, but also they help us regulating weather patterns and providing a habitat for countless species. Beyond their environment benefits, trees have the potential to drive inclusive economic growth, as we will see during this panel. Through sustainable forestry, agroforestry, and ecosystems restoration, native trees can help generate jobs, boost local economies, and offer alternative livelihoods for rural and indigenous communities. The challenges are to align tree-based climate solutions with economic strategies that prioritize both people and the planet, ensuring that growth does not come at the cost of environmental degradation. Supertrees are native tree species that have exceptional qualities in terms of carbon capture, ecosystem restoration, and biodiversity support. These species are resilient, fast-growing, and can thrive in degraded landscapes, making them ideal candidates for large-scale restoration projects. Beyond environmental benefits, supertrees can also play a role in building countries' economies, such as the one of Brazil, and we will see some examples, offering products such as fruits, nuts, and sustainable timber. Despite their immense potential, supertrees are not yet used as widely as they could be due to barriers like insufficient investment, a lack of public awareness, and the complexity of restoring degraded ecosystems. By focusing more attention and resources on these species, we can unlock the potential of these supertrees to help achieve global climate and biodiversity targets. Today's discussion will explore the critical role that these supertrees, particularly as Emily mentioned in the context of Brazil and Colombia, can play in achieving global climate, biodiversity, and restoration goals while supporting local bioeconomies. Brazil is home to an extraordinary range of ecosystems, including the Amazon, the Atlantic forest, and the Cerrado. And these forests not only support some of the richest biodiversity on Earth, but also they are essential carbon sinks and play a vital role in regulating the global climate. However, we are at a crossroads. Deforestation and land degradation continue to threaten vital ecosystems, and the pace of restoration has not yet matched the scale of this challenge. This is where the concept of super trees comes in. These trees can be seen as a superpower of biodiversity, leading to both environmental restoration and economic growth. Yet, there are several key barriers that we need to overcome, and with that, hopefully, we will address during this discussion. There's an investment gap. There's a supply chain challenge. But also, we need more innovation and research around these super trees. So this afternoon's or evening dialogue will focus on how we can address these challenges and harness the potential of these native super trees to restore degraded lands, combat climate change, and build a sustainable future. With that, I would like to turn to our panelists to begin the presentations. And I would like to start with Dr. Miguel Kalman. Yes. Senior Director of Programs at Conservation International Brazil. Miguel has a deep understanding of how Brazil's native forests contribute to global biodiversity, and he has led groundbreaking projects that use restoration to support both people and nature. So please help me join with an applause to welcome Miguel.
I'm here to talk about why Brazil has the ambition and the potential to become a global leader on planted forests with native species for timber production and many other uses. And this ambition is really to see in Brazil plantations of native species there at the same scale of the major sectors we have in Brazil. So as you probably know, in Brazil, we have maybe around 40 plus million hectares of soybean. We have 10 million hectares of eucalyptus and pine plantations. So we believe that planting native forests to fulfill not only the timber market, but also to generate many other benefits, including climate change mitigation, adaptation, biodiversity, generate jobs, we can go big. We can think big. So we are talking about having a new economy with native species with 10 or even 20 million hectares in the next 30 years. So we have the potential, we have the land, we have the will, and we have the need to do this in a very fast way. So this is a little bit of the history. We started in 2016. We had this challenge to demonstrate that planting of native species is a viable business. And the main reason why we were challenged to show this is because if we really want to get to that scale, we need to attract a lot of private investments. So we need to start in 2016. We put together a lot of business cases. Some of you probably received this publication here to show that, yeah, there's a business there. But again, from a business at the project level, how do we get to these millions of hectares? So we also, in 2016, we went to the Brazilian Coalition on Climate, Forest, and Agriculture, which is a coalition of 400 plus organizations, financial institutions, civil society, academia, private sector. So we went there to plant a seed within the coalition to see how we could really push this economy forward. And also we said, look, if we really want to make this work, let's learn from what happened with the pulp and paper sector 4 decades ago. When they started to plant pine and eucalyptus there, they said, we need to invest on research and development. And this, again, you need to do this for any major sector. You need to invest a lot of R&D. So research and development is key. So we went to the Brazilian Coalition and we launched the idea to develop a pre-competitive program for research and development for native species. So then how do we go about this? So we said, let's first of all understand what was done in Brazil in terms of research with native species over the last 4 decades. Let's understand all the gaps, and let's also see what would be our priorities to put this program forward, and also select which trees we could start to work on this program. And then we put together a publication which is available. We have there all the priorities, all the gaps, all the species of the program, And then we worked another couple of years to launch the program. So in 2021, we finally launched a program, a national program, to work with research and development with native species in Brazil, focusing initially in the Amazon and the Atlantic forest. And why we decided to focus on is because we just didn't want to spread ourselves too thin. So we started in 2021 to look for funding to support the R&D program. And then last year, we received a significant support from the Bezos Earth Fund to kick off the program. So the program is running, and later we are going to hear from my colleague, Daniel Piotto, more results of the program. And we are also working right now with the National Development Bank in Brazil to structure a project, a 5 million project, to also support this R&D program. So when you start seeing banks interested in supporting something like that, it means that there's a business there. So our priorities in this research and development. So we also understood that only working on research would not be enough. So within the Brazilian coalition, we said, look, we need to work also on creating the regulatory framework to make this attractive to landowners, to investors, so they can feel comfortable in making these long-term investments. We also said, what about the markets? There's a market out there. There's a huge demand of timber, but most of the timber right now, as we all know, is coming from natural forests. Here we are talking about planting native species on degraded lands, so we need to see what kind of markets we can have for all kinds of species, right? And then, of course, the last one, we need a lot of money. So money is key to move this forward. The good news is that we have been seeing all around, I don't know how many of you went to a lot of presentations this week. There's a lot of private, big companies put a lot of money on native species, either for restoration or for silviculture. Of course, this is being driven a lot by the carbon markets, but it doesn't really matter. Things started, and we need to keep pushing very hard. So, again, our intent with this R&D, as I said, we didn't want to recreate anything. We wanted to learn from what happened in the past, so let's learn. The same concept was applied with the exotic plantations, because they developed a lot of knowledge on that. You had to be pretty competitive. Again, when you come on this kind of business, you need to create a kind of environment where everybody can benefit from that knowledge to be generated so they can really keep going. Co-financing is not about only private investments. It's about philanthropy. It's about multilateral funding. It's a combination of funding to make this work. Also, we need to keep demonstrating the technical, economic, and social viability of this kind of business. It's not like there's a lot we still need to learn to demonstrate, to really scale. Capacity building is key. Any new economy, you need to have the right capacity there to make this work. And of course, have an approach to really disseminate the knowledge as we generate. So, why silviculture is so important? Again, there's a huge growing demand for timber, especially with this low carbon economy. So timber tends the market to increase more and more. But I think most important, if we don't demonstrate that silviculture native species can also help to reduce deforestation and degradation, help to increase biodiversity conservation, remove millions of tons of CO2, increase jobs and income for indigenous people and local communities. We also need to reduce the cost. It costs a lot of money to invest. People, they always say, well, it costs a lot of money. I say, yeah, but if you can make a lot of money out of that, why not? We can still invest, right? And of course, public policies. We need to create incentives, the right policies, so people can feel really incentivized to really plant native species. So what is this research program, to give you an idea about that we have been developing along those years? We will start putting 20 research sites in the Amazon and the Atlantic forest. So we have research sites that we can compare them. We can use protocols. We can establish all of them, and we can compare different species, how they are being managed, how we can do improvement and breeding. We selected 30 species. Daniel Piotto, my colleague, will talk about some of them. I will show a list. So we selected 3 priority species, but doesn't mean that we need to work only with 30 species. But again, in the beginning, when we said 30 species, people said that we were crazy. We said, no, we have to do this because we want to have a multi-diverse kind of system. We are not talking about planting native forests here to have clear cut. We are talking about managing them in a sustainable way. Never clear cut. We plant on degraded lands, but we keep the forest standing, managing them in a sustainable way to ensure that we achieve all the benefit we need to achieve. So again, don't get confused. We are not talking about planting exotics, clear cutting the land here. It's really, we prove that we can manage this on the long term and generate revenue to the investors. And a goal, of course, most important, we'll work with a network of partners. We are going to work with universities, research institutions, private sector to establish those research sites. This is the beauty of this program. It's a network of researchers in Brazil doing this. And you can see the list of topics there that we're going to work: forest management, genetic improvements, seeds and seedling. All those things, they came from our research gap and priority for developing this. So, a lot of topics. And we also, I don't want to say that we were very clever, but what we also said, look, we are going to put new research plots here to start understanding those species, but why not go into existing research areas that they established 3-4 decades ago, go back to those areas and start collecting data right away. So there are a lot of sites that we identified that we will go there. We call them the reference hubs. We start collecting data right away to understand if you planted a tree, a species, what the quality of that timber. So we're going to start selection also for some of the improvements, look to the reference sites. So this is a list of the 30 species. I don't expect you to memorize them, but again, they are available on the internet, their publication. Danielle will talk more about some specific of them. And when we say like potential super trees, because we don't know, right? We have a good feeling that we had a good criteria to select them, but we don't know if they're going to be the super trees. Hope they will, but we don't know. But we will know shortly anyway. So what is the expected impact from this new forest economy with native species that includes the R&D and many other things? First of all, it will contribute to the national plan to recover native vegetation in Brazil. So right now, there's a second version of the plan in Brazil, is to reforest and restore 12 million hectares of degraded lands. And within the plan, they already put that silviculture native species will be key to achieve this target. So we were able to influence policy to make silviculture native species or planted forest native species part of the plan. Of course, we have to integrate local knowledge on this work. We cannot go to the place and start bringing species for people to plant. We need to understand what they are willing to plant and combine local knowledge with what we can bring research. And of course, need to include indigenous people and local communities. This will not fly if we don't really work together with them. We have potential to generate almost 2 million jobs as part of this. Of course, this will certainly increase Brazil's GDP. We are talking about new economy, so it has to influence the GDP. Brazil to become a leader of sustainable timber production, strengthen the formation of networks and researchers among the main research institutions, and of course, promote training of forest professionals and technicians for this new economy coming. So I went here to say that this research program, this whole thing is about the future of silviculture of native species in Brazil. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kalman. And I would like now to invite Dr. Daniel Piotto to the podium. He's a professor of forestry at the Federal University of Southern Bahia. Dr. Piotto is a leading academic voice in forestry with a focus on sustainable land management and the ecological importance of native tree species. Please welcome.
Good evening, everybody. It's an honor to be here, and I'm gonna follow up on Miguel's presentation. So I'm gonna show some results of our R&D program. And so this is a picture of an Amazon tree, the Ceiba pintandra in Rondônia state. So before I came here, I was talking with my students. I told them I'm gonna talk about super trees. So I was asking them, what you guys think all these super trees are, and then they say, oh, first thing that came to their minds was, okay, they're big trees, right? So everybody, first thing that comes to my mind as well, we're talking about these super big trees. So you get like the baobab in Africa, you get sequoias, and recently in Brazil we found like this gigantic tree here that's the Denise excelsa, so that's around like almost 100-meter tall. So that's the first thing that comes to our minds. And the second thing is that super trees are trees that grow really fast, right? And then we have the three examples there. One of the poplars, they're very common in temperate regions, and pines in the subtropical region, and the eucalyptus down in the tropics. So, so there's two things that would come to our mind. But then Mauricio, when he was giving his opening words, there are much more things that we should consider for a super tree, right? And so then I want to just like spend a couple of minutes just discussing a little bit what are these other things that we should consider for a super tree. And so there is one important thing is that the range, where does the species occur. And then I have two examples here. One is Platymenia reticulata, it's a timber, both like timber species from Brazil, one with a very wide range, and the other one very narrow range. And then if we're thinking about a super tree, these species, and it's a good, just a little disclaimer here, we're going to be talking about species, super species, and super trees, so we might get confused, but we get super species, then we're going to pick the super trees within the population of that super species, right? So then if we have a wide range, you're going to be able to do much more things, and these species will be much more resilient, for example, for climate change. You have one species that are very kind of narrow range. Perhaps this species is not going to be used like in different parts of the tropics or in different parts of Brazil, for example. So another very important thing are the traits, right? So what traits we want in a super tree, and obviously, we want these trees to grow really fast. And depending on the product, if we're talking about timber, we want the tree that goes straight, right? So then we can use much more of the timber. And then obviously the timber quality, so wood density and the color of the tree. So there are several characteristics of the wood, and that is related to the market. And finally, the resilience, and in the resilience, we can include resistance to floodings and droughts, and pests and disease. So there are like several traits that we should consider for a super tree. So then I get some like pictures here showing like different colors of wood that we get in our species list that Miguel just showed. A very nice tree with like straight bole, and then this little tree that an Ameliaceae that got infected by this pest. So, and then the very last thing that we should consider, obviously, is the use we're gonna give to the super tree, and then we're talking about for here, and especially in this program, we're talking about timber because we think that timber can give the scale, for all these other challenges that we have, like such as climate change. So timber by far is a very important product. And then we also get like non-timber forest products. And then we have some species that can combine like timber and non-timber forest products in the same species. And also there's species that also can offer, like if you have like fast growth and fruits and other things, so then you can contribute like to environmental service, such as not just carbon sequestration, but also like wildlife use, for example, right? So you're gonna have a plantation, and that is gonna be not just used for humans, but also for the animals. So that's very important too. And another very important thing is that most of our super trees are actually in the red list because they're super. That's why people have been cutting them down all over the place, right? So we have like very emblematic examples such as the Paul Brazil, right? As in the red list, the Brazilian rosewood, mahogany. So almost like half of the species that we've been working in this program are in the red list as well. So, and they're in the red list not because they are like rare, but they're in the red list because people want, the products of these trees. So it's a very important thing too, and it's an important outcome also for this kind of new generation of native species silviculture. So not just like producing like goods, but also saving the populations of very endangered species. Well, so that was just a introduction of my take of Supertrees, and now I'm gonna go really fast on some of the results. But before that, I just wanna go really fast on the criteria that we use to select the 30 species that Miguel mentioned, right? So, Brazil has around 7,000 tree species, right? So, and we can't really work with all of them, and again, so even if you're gonna work with 30 species, people think, oh, you guys are crazy, right? So, you should pick less species, but as we're gonna be working with mixed plantations of these diverse systems, so we need to have, different species, and also because Brazil is a big country, so we're not gonna be planting araucaria in the Amazon and mahogany in the southern part of Brazil. So we needed to choose, different species, and 15 species was kind of an average number that we can handle, for the research program, and we can also, cover the entire country, the Amazon and the Atlantic forest. And then, the criteria, basically, we started with the silviculture, aspects of these species. I just mentioned those. And then, obviously, the economical side of that, we're not going to be working with a species that has no market, so the market's very important. So if we're talking about mahogany, all these very famous species. So if you have no timber for planted forests of these species, that's going to have a market for sure. And also non-timber forest products as well. And in the integration with indigenous people and local communities, that's very important as well. It's not just timber, but we got other benefits. And very last is the efficiency of the research process, because we did not start from scratch, right? So people have been doing research on native species for quite a while. So then we chose the species that we had more knowledge already. So then the cost to get, advancement with the science of these species is gonna be lower, and we're gonna get that in very, very short time. So this is the species that Miguel just showed, and then what we've done so far. So we've been producing publications that can help not just farmers but also investors. So there are two very important questions that people want to know. So how fast this tree grows and what kind of timber I'm gonna get. So then in that book, we have some copies here. We studied 40 different species of the Atlantic forest, and we're producing the same material for the Amazon. We also produce all the allometric models, so then people can use the growth curves to estimate carbon, and then estimate carbon sequestration of these plantations. And a couple of weeks ago, we published this paper in Forest Ecology and Management with the diameter growth models of 100 tropical species, so there are 80 native species and 20 exotics, and then most of our native species without any breeding have growth rates very similar to some of the most famous exotic species, such as African mahogany, Australian cedar, and so. This morning, I don't know if you guys are around, but we heard that we need to know what species and where we're gonna plant them, right? So that was the message that we learned this morning. So we also are doing this, what we call the topoclimatic zoning. So we're studying, the best portions of the Amazon. For example, here we have two examples: the Brazil nut and the Andiroba. So degraded lands of the Amazon and areas in the Amazon where you're gonna get better growth rates for these species. We also are studying, we're talking about tree planting, so it's a long-term business, and we're talking, and we've seen a lot of events related to climate change. So understanding the effects of climate change is also very important. So we've been modeling different growth rates in different regions. So in dry weather, in wet weather, and the response of different species. And we also have a program on breeding, so genetic breeding, and then these are the preliminary results. So this nice curve that the trees are growing 60% more or less when you select the best material. So very, very promising results. And another very interesting result that we just got. So we get like long-term data from different sites. And then we've been studying that we don't need to wait like 30 years to find out what are the super trees within that population. So in four years, we can assert like that 9% of the species, there is the best one at 4-year-old is gonna be the same ones at 30, 40 years old. So we can select the best material. We don't need to wait like 30, 40 years to select the best material for genetic improvement. And this is some pictures of the research that we've been doing. So Emily was talking about all the grafting and this and that, so a lot of action in the field. This is a research that we've been doing in partnership with Symbiosis Investment. I guess the founder and CEO is around here. So very promising results. So we're working with new clones, and we also have cross-pollinated experiments, so a lot of action going on there. And to finalize, as Miguel said, we're like expanding the program, right? So we have this partnership with Symbiosis. So we planted one site in Rondonia. So the new site, so we have a new generation of experiments, and we have also the reference hub. So we have like been working in both sides. We established like the first experiment in Rondonia this year, and then they're going to establish another one at Symbiosis in November, and we have a partnership with Green that's going to be the next speaker. So then the idea is, is to have like companies, universities, all together in this pre-competitive program to accelerate, the results. And also, have this platform, so then you can get more investments, and you can get this silviculture of native species really taking off in Brazil. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I want now to invite Fernando Visser, Director of Technology and Innovation at Regreen. Fernando's work is at the cutting edge of how technology and innovation can help scale up restoration efforts and bridge the investment gap for native species in Brazil. Fernando, welcome to the podium. Pleasure.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone, for being here and for having me. It was quite interesting to hear Miguel talk a lot about the pre-competitive agenda in Brazil and everything we need to build in terms of science. Dr. Piotto as well told a lot about different uses for timber, the challenge in picking up the right species, right? We have the technology and the scientific knowledge for over 30 or 40 years in Brazil of silviculture, but restricted to 1 or 2 species, right? So Brazil alone has over 90 million hectares of planted forests for eucalyptus. That technology, that scientific knowledge was developed over the last few decades. The challenge now is how do we scale that 3, 4, 5, or 10-fold, because we need to do that in a number of species for native species. And I heard once one thing from a professor. I'm going to talk a little bit about Regreen and what we do, but we were a company founded by scientists in essence, and science is our backbone, our core. And we were founded by a group of leading scientists in the ecological restoration and biodiversity in Brazil. And one of them once said to me, what is our blessing in Brazil is also our curse, because we have so much diversity, so much biodiversity. We have over 1,000 species mapped in Brazil. It's kind of hard to pick. So sometimes that's one of our challenges as well. How do we streamline and focus? So I think the work being done is absolutely paramount so we can get there at scale. So Regreen, quickly, I'll just quickly cover what is Regreen. Regreen is a fairly new business. We've been around for 2 years. As I said, we were founded by scientists in the ecological restoration field. We were founded in 2022, and from our foundation, we've been scaling up ecological restoration in Brazil. Today we are present in 2 biomes in Brazil. Firstly, in the Atlantic forest, where we have 3 properties that we're restoring in the south of Bahia. The south of Bahia is one of the most important biodiversity hotspots in the world and very much endangered by human action and everything that we're doing to destroy nature, unfortunately. And we're also present in the Amazon biome with 2 projects in the north. So total area of 25,000 hectares within our portfolio of properties, and we've been restoring these properties over the course of the last 1 year. How do we do that? So we operate with a couple of strategies. Our end goal is to restore, and we want to restore over a course of 15 years, 1 million hectares in Brazil. That is very ambitious. I think these are one of these goals that once we put in a PowerPoint at the beginning of a process, we'll say, well, that's definitely doable. And then you start doing that, you'll see, wow, it's actually quite hard to do 1,000. How am I going to get to 1 million? But that's our vision for 15 years. And we'll do that by restoring forests for the carbon market, right? For being monetized by carbon credits, high quality removal carbon credits. Recently, we've signed our first contract offtake agreement with Microsoft. So I think the role of these corporates in supporting the carbon market is really important, because at the end of the day, they're enabling ecological restoration. But as important, it's the production of forestry products. So timber and non-timber forest products, premium timber, and other sustainable products. In our strategy, the idea is that we'll do, over the course of our 15 years, 30% of the area destined to 1 cycle of sustainable silviculture. So we plant a mix of species, a mix of 5 to 10 species, which are the ones that we're trying to figure out together in our partnerships. And we'll plant them, we'll harvest these planted species once only. But the way we'll do, as Miguel said, we're never doing clear cutting, because the end goal is to achieve full restoration. So we'll do planting intertwined with the restoration methods that we're doing for the other sections of the properties. So this means that by the time we harvest 1 cycle, forest is already regenerating. So the forest subsystems are already regenerating, and that portion that will be destined initially to timber will be fully restored as well. Okay, so that's a little bit about us. And why timber? I think timber is obviously, there are a number of reasons of why to do timber, and that's one of the things that timber is one of the things that sets Regreen apart from other developers and a couple of other initiatives in Brazil. For us, timber is a trajectory to achieve restoration, as I said. So it's 1 cycle. And timber is a massive market, right? Currently, the current timber market is of over $700 billion US dollars globally. There's data from the IBA Institute, but that doesn't at all reflect the potential of the future. Huge sectors will need to decarbonize over the next few decades, and construction sector, aluminum sector, and timber will have multiple uses for the construction industry in the foreseeable future. So how do we provide that supply, that stable supply? There's a huge opportunity for initiatives like Regreen and a few others that are emerging to be that source of stable supply, okay? So that's a little bit about timber. Timber, I hear a lot about, well, How does timber coincide with carbon? Well, they're absolutely complementary because the trees that I'm harvesting for timber and planting, they will stock carbon as well. So it's a complementary strategy to the pure carbon strategy, 100% native species, and single cycle of growth. As you said here, science, allows us to produce stable native timber while restoring forests, 100% native, alternated lines of planting, no clear cuts, as I said. That is very, very important. And the end results are, as well as providing an additional monetization strategy to enable ecological restoration, timber is an incredible strategy to ensure permanence of ecological restoration. Because by doing timber, we're establishing an entire value chain in the surroundings of our projects, engaging with local communities that will be involved in maintaining those projects. At some point, we'll be harvesting those species as well, and we'll be developing a local chain of industrialization, sawmills, and so on. So timber, if well done, is also a strategy that enhances ecological restoration because it provides the livelihoods of the people that live around our projects. Okay, as well as that, the Supertrees, as mentioned, they provide non-timber forest products. So in one of our properties in the north of Brazil, for example, in the Entre Rios project, we have over 100 families that every day from the surrounding communities go inside our property. So they access our properties to collect fruit and non-timber forest products like acai, for example. So these Supertrees are absolutely fundamental source of multiple layers of revenue to the surrounding communities. A few examples of the trees. I'm not going to try to not even explain them. I'm not a scientist, and my colleagues here do that much better than myself. So an example of the way we do. So you can see that when planting sustainable native timber, it looks much more sort of organic and messy with the rest of the forest. It's not so aligned. So that means that we're actually building a forest, and that's the strategy. And finally, this is a picture of our first property. That's the Ouro Verde property in the south of Bahia. That's a 700-hectare property. On the top sort of part of the slide, that was when we started operating that property, okay? You can see that on the left-hand side, very degraded, low productivity cattle grazing land. We were starting to prepare the soil. On the right-hand side, it's the standing forest that was already there. And we can see that 1 year after we started planting, we can already see the forest growing. These super trees are coming back. And the whole landscape, sort of profile starts to change. So that's really exciting to see in action in the field. That's it. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I would like to invite you to join me in a journey. This was an academic and personal journey around one of these super trees, the Guaymaro breadnut tree. This project was a project that we did in collaboration with Kew Gardens and many institutions in Colombia. And it shows how botanical gardens can help and can impact communities. So we're going to be talking about this part of Colombia in the northeast, in the border with Venezuela, in the Serranía del Perijá. And this is how the landscape looks like. This is the tropical dry forest, incredibly beautiful. And when you go to the tropical dry forest, you will meet this amazing tree, Brosimum alicastrum in the Moray Sea, called Guaymaro, or in some parts of the world, it's called the Mayan nut, or the forgotten Mayan nut. To give you an idea about the size of this tree, this can be up to 50 meters high. It's absolutely immense. Straight trunk is being used as a timber tree, And the range is quite broad, as you can see, grows from Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, all the way to Mexico. And this is called the forest that this tree forms is called the food forest, because when these trees produce the seeds are edible, and everybody eats. Indigenous peoples, communities, animals, mammals, birds. So it's incredible. It has an incredible potential to create these food forests. And it's been called the forgotten nut because even though it's used by several indigenous communities across the tropics, the neotropics, we have forgotten the use of this tree. This is how the seeds, when we harvest, they look like, and they cover the surface when they are in fruit. So, and not just that, they obviously produce many other natural products. As I was saying, it's a woody tree. The timber is high quality tree, which was also a bless and a curse because it's been put under threat in many of these places. So as part of a project that I led called the Useful Plants and Fungi of Colombia, we wanted to create some models to generate impact on the ground in a few pilot areas across the country. So we chose to work on this area in northeast of Colombia, where we found several social issues. And we discovered that this tree was actually that there were still some very important patches of this tree, and that this tree was absolutely vital for the maintenance of the tropical ecosystem, the tropical dry forest here. So to give you an idea about where in Colombia this tree can grow, I'm showing you this map. All the red areas and yellow areas are areas where potentially this tree can be planted. But the black dots in there are all the available records that we have in all the collections so far. And very unfortunately, this tree that is found in the tropical dry forest, the tropical dry forest is the most threatened ecosystem in the neotropics. 95% of this ecosystem has been destroyed. So this is in red, what we have left of the tropical dry forest, and in black, those records that I was showing you. So in Colombia, we know that only 5% of the original niche persists of this tree. And unfortunately, in this map, we can see in these dashed lines the mining license. So that pretty much covered the entire range of where this tree is found. And what we can see in this landscape is pretty much this. Unfortunately, because of the lights, you can't see much, but we have deforestation, huge deforestation in the tropical dry forest. Most of the times caused by mining in this area, but also the expansion of agriculture, including oil palms and cattle in this area. In this area where we were, there was also a particular situation because this was one of the most affected regions in terms of violence. This is a picture of a small village called Estados Unidos, United States. And this is United States, Colombia. And it was called Estados Unidos because locals would say that it's easier, or it takes as much to get to this village than to go to the United States. So it's really isolated. In year 2000, in this town, there were 2,200 people. And in year 2001, 8 people left. 8 people were left. Most of the people in this village were killed by the massacres of the war between paramilitaries and guerrillas, and some other people had to migrate. So in the last 20 years, the people have been slowly going back, trying to live again, but they had no options. So we decided to help, and we decided to test our model and to see if we could bring what we've been talking today, conditions for these people to succeed, to improve their livelihoods, and to make peace among themselves, but also with nature. So we created a project, an entire project around this guaymaro, this super tree, and we created a resource online. And you will be, I would like to invite you to check this resource with all the videos, etc. We work with the community to identify the threats of all the species, but also to gather the knowledge about the guaymaro tree. We created a tree of the wishes, a wishes tree here. We understood and recovered the knowledge that they had. These are cookies made out of the flower of the seeds of the guaymaro tree. And this is a drink that they have. It's like a tea or like a beverage, hot beverage made out of the juice of the seeds of this tree. So, and with them, we started a project to bring back the knowledge around the tree. So as you can see in these images, we have even the houses painted with the image of the tree, and we gather all the knowledge about how to propagate the tree from seed all the way to mature individuals. And with the help of the community, we compile on all the information about the best techniques to harvest the seeds, but also the best techniques for working with the local communities to capture those seeds. Because as you can imagine, these are very high trees in difficult landscapes. So we build these structures that were established in various parts where we had identified these big trees that allow the people to harvest the seeds, as you can see in this picture. And we taught them how to evaluate the health of the seeds, measure the weight and the status, the health of the seeds. We also taught them how to monitor the trees, how to make the inventories. So with the local communities, they started marking these trees, identifying which were the most successful in the seed production. And then we taught them, we were further, and we taught them how to make a primary transformation. So rather than just like consuming locally, we taught them how to clean them, classify them, or in situ, how to dry them. So we transfer this capacity to that. And then we went even further, and we taught them how to make a secondary transformation of this product in situ, so that they could send the product with added value to centers, companies such as in Bogota or in Medellin. So they were collecting the seeds, cleaning them, drying them up, adding value inside, in situ. And we contacted some companies in Bogota that were interested in developing the products, and they helped preparing the products that then was distributed in various cities across the country. So by doing that, also, we contacted various restaurants in various cities, in Cartagena, Medellin, Cali, etc. We invited chefs who then were experimenting how best prepare their dishes. And this is an example of a dish that is sold in one of the best restaurants in Cartagena, Celele. It's a Michelin restaurant that is showing these desserts made out of the flour of the product from the community in Perijá. And obviously the community is seeing an important income out of this. So with the community went back and we identify those areas where we could help restoring the forest, because they saw that by protecting this forest, by propagating the guaymaro, by planting them, they will be able to find an additional income. And with that, this is one of those trees. This has been a transforming example for me, because I could see how from a place that was where the community was really affected by the conflict, had no other way of income. They were thinking about mining, they were thinking about doing illegal traffic of species. We brought a solution, and now the community is happy protecting the forest. We are recovering the tropical dry forest. We are helping them on ecological restoration, and they are improving their livelihoods. So thank you very much. And I think now it's time for our panel discussion. So I would like to invite everybody to the podium: Emily, Daniel, Fernando, and Miguel. So this time we're gonna make something a little bit different. Obviously I have a list of questions that I would love to ask you all, but I would like to give you first the opportunity to ask your questions based on the presentations and your knowledge. And maybe we can start a conversation that way. So I see a hand over there and another one there, and oh my goodness, this is gonna be interesting. So can I? Yes, thank you very much. Pardon? Over there.
Just hand this to your friend here.
Good evening. My question was for the first or the second presentation. You were saying that you were hoping having 12 million hectares regenerated. As an idea, how much today is deforested in Brazil, or in the last 5 years, yearly, how much hectares or million of hectares has been destroyed illegally, I would say, for soy or cows or whatever? To have an idea of what is the task that you're getting to.
Yeah, it's a very good question. It's like yeah, again, this is a very good question. It's like, do we want to restore before we protect and stop deforestation, or do we want to do both? Né? And for us, it is very clear that we need to do both, because right now, of course, we are losing much more than what we are restoring. There's no question about this. I don't remember the last number, deforestation that in Brazil. And there's one of the issues in Brazil is that not only we have illegal deforestation, but we also have legal deforestation. So landowners, they can still deforest, convert lands legally. So there's a big effort right now to see how we can find incentives for those landowners to protect the existing forests. And then, of course, we need to ensure that we don't have illegal deforestation. So, but the numbers right now is like what we are restoring doesn't compare to what we are losing through deforestation and degradation. So,
I just wanted to add a little bit, elaborate a little bit more on the question. It's a very good point, and we think that by planting, native species, we're gonna lower the pressure on the natural forest. I mean, we got deforestation, like land use change, conversion of forests into other land use, but there's a really big problem of illegal logging, selective logging, natural forests. So we believe that, by offering planted timber, we're gonna diminish that pressure on the natural forest. So I think that's another good good approach, to conserve the forest. And again, in the morning, Christian was talking about that. We need to conserve what we get, and we need to restore what we degraded. And we also need to transform our society. So, yeah.
I think I saw a question by Paul Smith. Paul? Yes.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate how these presentations were curated from a macro lens into a case study of an individual species. That was really cool. A quick question is, I saw quite a bit discussed around carbon credits and carbon products. I saw quite a bit as well on sort of non-timber forest products. Curious about your thoughts on biodiversity products and credits, in particular because the discussion is around natives. And if I can squeeze a quick follow-up there is, if anybody has any sort of thoughts or specific excitement into a broader template or platform or resource on how to create these species and location-specific methodologies. That's my personal interest in this space. Thank you.
Great question. Yeah, right? Yeah. Great question. I think, first, I'd say it's important to define that carbon credits are solely a unit of measure. That's solely a currency that we decide to, as a system, to transact, okay? When we're doing an ecological restoration project that is acquired by an off-taker, for example, a carbon credit off-taker, we are effectively generating a whole array of ecosystem services, right? So we could be here doing an engineering solution, stocking carbon on stone. That still wouldn't solve our challenge, our climate challenge. So when we restore, we're doing much more. And even though, to your point, we still don't have a system or a unit of measure that measures biodiversity in a simplified and ample way, right? There are a number of standards out there and working groups out there trying to define what is this standard that we will adopt as a group. We're still not quite there yet as to have a standard that is scalable and that we can transact. That being said, we believe definitely as a company that invests in that standard's coming over the next 2 to 3 years, possibly. And we already have clients that, even though they are acquiring through the carbon currency a restoration project, they're very much interested and require us to prove the effects on biodiversity of what we do. So they are indirectly paying for the biodiversity co-benefits. And not only biodiversity co-benefits, for the water co-benefits, for the social co-benefits. So all of these additional ecosystem services, they are provided by developers and by initiatives. And to some extent, we start seeing then the market requiring us to sort of price these or embed them within sort of current carbon structures or develop these standards. So we think we're going towards that direction and quite confident we'll get there in foreseeable future.
And just to build a little bit on what Fernando has said, I mean, I think if we were only looking from a carbon lens, you would have heard us saying, oh, great news, we could do it right now. We can restore tens of millions of hectares using eucalyptus. And boom, the carbon problem, we'd have a huge solution there. But unsurprisingly, none of us have said that because we're not just looking through that lens. As you've alluded to, carbon is a piece of a broader story about how to drive nature protection and restoration, the social benefits, and the mitigation together. And so right now, there's a limited number of mechanisms that we have at our disposal to pay for some of these costs. Carbon is one. We don't yet have thriving nature markets. A lot of those benefits exist outside of what our financial system currently values. So we need to work on that. And at the same time, we need to get moving today, making the most of what we have, which is these carbon markets. So I think the role of what we've presented is that we can produce really premium, nature-rich carbon credits that can sell at a premium value and can inject a really urgently needed stream of income to help make this broader restoration goal possible.
And you were mentioning about biodiversity credits as well. So the difficulty, the challenge with biodiversity credits is how you measure biodiversity. And I'm pleased to say that there's been a large group of people led by Paul Smith from Botanic Gardens Conservation International that are launching the Global Biodiversity Standard. And it is that bet to have a standard way to measure biodiversity, so we can apply, for instance, biodiversity credits, and we can measure them in a standardized way. And perhaps, Paul, and also you had your hand up, so it's an opportunity for you to
so just on the biodiversity credit thing, we have also been packaging up individual tree species recovery into what we've called biodiversity impact credits. And I have to concur with the panel here entirely that at the moment there is no specific market for whatever you're packaging as biodiversity. So we are looking at it at the moment as a co-benefit for carbon. And we have just done a deal with the Climate Impact Partners to try to package up native tree species recovery into carbon projects. It's actually been quite a difficult sell, more difficult, I think, than we anticipated. It was launched in February. And if you go to SIP's website, then you can see the Save a Species program there, which is not actually sold as biodiversity credits, but it is sold as a co-benefit for carbon. But we are hoping that biodiversity credits will eventually. We've been part of the WEF McKinsey group for the last 2 years in trying to put together packages. Okay, so my question is really, and it's also a plea really to around your climate resilience research to work with the Botanic Garden community. And I think one of the key things, and I saw Arariba was one of your sites there, which is great. We work with them in Mata Atlantica. I think one of the things about Botanic Gardens which differentiates them from municipal gardens or other kinds of gardens is that the collections are documented. If you want to find out which gardens have which species of tree, go to BGCI's website, go to tools, go into the global tree portal, choose your species, and it will tell you whether that species is in botanic gardens around the world. So something like Pau brasilia, for example, is not just in Brazilian gardens, it's also in other gardens around the world. And they're documented, so they're also outside their natural bioclimatic envelope. And that's useful. We also have a big team of people working on using that information, which is cleaned up GBIF data around natural distribution, but also data sets from street trees, data sets from botanic gardens, which grow about 18,000 different tree species, to predict climate resilience. And up till now, it's been largely based on temperature and precipitation. Again, a plug, go look at those tools, the climate assessment tool. You can put your location in, you can put your species in, and it will give you a traffic light as to whether that tree is still likely to be there in 50 or 90 years' time. You also choose your climate scenario. But what that group is now working on is also extreme weather events. So drought, frost, tolerance to those, which again, we can bring in that information from botanic gardens because all of this is recorded. And that gives us a much better idea of climate resilience than simply taking native natural distributions.
Thank you. Do we have, I can see a hand up over there.
Very quickly, a question for Fernando. So obviously the carbon credit market and the biodiversity market are a big driver of the economics, but you also talked about a $700 billion timber market globally per year. So in Brazil specifically, in these projects, Are you growing products for the Brazilian timber market or for export? And are you competing on quality, price, or the social benefits of the project?
Yeah, really good question. I think currently, let's say the vast majority of that number I've showed comprises, well, timber made out of exotic species, right? So timber products that come from eucalyptus or pine or whatever. So there's a massive opportunity to develop the market for native species. Our thesis is that we'll plant high quality, high density native timber. So we're talking about species that have densities from medium to high densities. They'll take a little bit longer to grow. That means by the time we're harvesting them from years 20, 25, and 30, we're going to be able to collect premium prices. Okay, so I think that's the original thesis in our business model. We're obviously working together with research to identify native species that could act as pioneers in that process, and native timber species that could be harvested before. Okay, but that's obviously something that will be developed over the course of the next few years. So the current market for native timber is much more focused around high quality, high density timber. Where does that timber go? Initially, most of that timber will be exported, okay? Especially in the European market and the North American market. We have the likes of companies like IKEA and others in the furniture and home improvement business that are very well positioned to start developing timber products from native species. There's a whole array of use for timber in the construction industries as well, with cross-laminated timber and other laminated products. So that's the idea. The idea is that we'll develop that market over the course of the next few years with key partners in these markets particularly.
So before the next question from the audience, I would like to actually ask a question to you, Emily. So, so you've been at the forefront of large-scale restoration initiatives, and your work involves identifying and addressing barriers to landscape restoration. So I would like to know, what specific challenges have you seen in mobilizing funding for native tree species? And for instance, in particular, how is the Bezos Earth Fund working to overcome these challenges?
Thank you. Well, it's been really interesting since stepping into this role out of philanthropy. And what has really become crystal clear to me is that we have these big, bold, global and national goals for climate and nature. The only place that they become real is when they hit the ground. And despite the surge we have a proven technology, we have case studies, we have political will to restore, the agenda still really isn't scaling. And I think the most important reason that it's not yet scaling is because the capital and the demand responsive capacity support is not reaching the ground. It's not yet reaching the frontline groups, the businesses, the nonprofits, the community organizations that are doing the day in and day out work of restoration. And so that's where our philanthropy has really focused in our first 2 years of engagement on restoration, trying to build the infrastructure to get more funding to the ground, and also really listen to understand what some of those capacity needs really are. And many of them, on the theme of this panel, are around how to make income, how to make restoration a business that generates income that's felt at that household level. So that's been our first order of focus, and now we start to know who's out there, what businesses are restoring, what inputs do they need, what R&D do they need to do more of their work faster. And now that we know what we're talking about, we can start to talk about how to scale it.
Thank you very much. So I saw a hand up. Can we have a microphone over there, please?
Hi, thanks so much for being here and sharing your knowledge. I'm Victoria. I have a question, but I think it needs a little bit of context first. So I'm from Toronto. I work with Toronto Nature Stewards. We're a grassroots nonprofit that does community-led ecological restoration. And so I really have the honor of working with elders in the community who have like 40, 50 years of just like horticultural experience as like master gardeners and stuff. And when we go into our ravines and plant native plants, part of a procedure that they feel really strongly about is sourcing seeds that have not been selectively breeded. And personally, seeing your presentation, I'm super excited by the work y'all are doing. And so what I really am curious about is specifically on the topic of selectively breeding super trees. I'm really curious to know, like, in terms of technical procedures, are there any measures that ensure the traits we're selecting for don't also have negative ecological ramifications for pollinators, for example, or other wildlife? Just as an analogy, I know that some of the native species, the reason, like, humans selectively breed, for example, for color, and it ends up actually doing a poorer job of feeding pollinators because of that sort of interaction. So really just curious about the technical procedures that are in place, because again, I think this is super exciting work.
Who wants to start?
Well, we're not working with genetic modified trees, right? So, and with native species, we're starting from scratch pretty much. So, and we're trying to follow the path of kind of most famous exotic species. So we have like two paths with one is crossbreeding, and the other one is cloning. So, and then there are several generations, So we find like superior trees in the wild, and then we start cloning them right away. So that's one path. And then we also do some breeding with like superior individuals in clonal orchards, and then we can get cross-pollinating F1 generation, then we can clone that again. So then we're gonna get gains and gains. Our research shows that just like selecting like the superior trees from the wild, we can get 40 to 50% increment in growth rates. And there's one thing that we're still unsure, that, for example, we're talking about timber quality, right? So is there a trade-off? So I'm planting mahogany, but I'm making this mahogany grow like so fast that perhaps the timber is not gonna look like the mahogany that's growing. So there's some questions for sure, but in terms of wildlife impact, I don't see like any problem because we're not really like dealing with modified, genetically modified species.
Yeah, and I want to share also a little bit of the complexity. This is a great question. I was showing an example about one species. I didn't go into the details, but we had to identify first the trees that were constant and were more productive in terms of high quality seeds. And we needed to evaluate the survival rates of those seeds and the variety of seeds that those trees were producing. That's why we were marking the trees. We were doing a selection process. But then, because these are edible seeds, edible products, and we wanted to include them in the market, so we needed to do all the evaluations about the bromatological studies because we needed to make sure that they were not imposing any secondary effects when consumed, and in order to get the certification so we could commercialize the products. So we had to do all the bromatological studies of the seeds. But then we managed to certify the population that we were working on. But the tree grows from Peru all the way to Mexico, and we don't know if the trees, the same trees in Mexico, maybe they have a better quality, maybe they are more productive. So as a next step, we would like to do even genomics and see the genetic variability of the populations, evaluation of traits to see which populations are better or not, differences in nutrition content. So it's a huge amount of potential, but also work that is behind working on just one of these super trees. Any other question from, I see a hand up over there.
Hi, this has been a great presentation. I've learned so much. This is like a very new topic for me, so I'm sorry if like this question is like a little bit dumb, but I was wondering if you guys have researched how these projects are impacting like the surrounding environments, because obviously like planting new trees, planting new forests changes like what animals are coming through an area, also changes potentially like the climate of that specific area that you guys are doing your projects in.
Well, I could kick off. A great question, so thank you for raising it. Where I think sometimes where tree-based restoration can get into trouble is if it is causing the conversion of other native ecosystems. So for example, if there's an idea that we're going to go grow a forest in a place like on grasslands where trees really never grew in dense stands, that can have, as you've highlighted, very negative effects on the ecological function and the wildlife in the system. Fortunately, none of what has been presented here is doing that. So what we focus on is restoring trees to places where forests did exist, where trees and forest cover did exist. And that actually really helps combat the very clear and very negative impact that we see today from degradation and from deforestation, which, as you've highlighted, has driven out a lot of the native biodiversity, plant and animal, has lowered the water tables, has resulted in soil erosion. So there's a very clear link when there's not enough tree cover in places where it used to be, and the negative outcomes that has, that restoration can address when done in the right ecological zones, which is where good restoration is concentrated.
Yeah, no, I just want to build a little bit more on that. And then we mentioned in the panel that, I mean, we're trying to do like a different silviculture here. So we're not like, we're moving from exotic monoculture to native mixed plantations. And then we're not going like for clear cuts anymore. So the idea is to have like strip cuts, patch cuts, so different, harvesting seasons. So then we can, diminish the impact on wildlife, and so we can keep forest cover. So I think, I think that's kind of the right path, not just for timber production, but also for forest restoration.
And then, because I know that time is ticking, I would like to ask a final question to you. And if you think in a key message in one sentence that you would like the audience to bring home out of this panel. So who would like to start? One sentence.
Always risky. Be the first one. I guess my message is we all need, as a group of people, to change our mindsets if we want nature to be a scalable business. We all need to embrace the unknown, and we all need to be really bold as to taking risk in our business decisions, taking risk in our research decisions, taking risk as to building a whole new value chain out of a forest. So I think that would be my key message. Let's just take risk and do it.
I think that our biggest challenge, again, 5 years ago, our dream was to see the private sector investing on native species, on plantations. Now in Brazil, we have like at least 4 companies already committed to reforest, restore 3 million hectares. So this is not the big issue right now. For us, the way I see, we have to make our business more inclusive. How do we make this relevant to the small landholders? How do we make this relevant to the local communities? It is hard to work, but they are all scattered around the landscape. So we need to figure out a way how to bring them to this. Otherwise, we will just have a lot of big investments and all these people will be excluded from the equation. So we need to, for me, this is the biggest challenge. So we need to make this good for everyone. So we want to address a global crisis, climate change, biodiversity loss is on, but the social part is as well as relevant as any other thing we do with our business. So
Well, my message is a bit biased, but I mean, I think that without like R&D, where I mean, we get like a lot of like good like intentions, but really like good science too. So R&D for native species, I think this program is very important, and I think that's gonna change the paradigm of silviculture in the tropics. Yeah.
You're not wiggling out of this, Mauricio, so you can have the last word. My main message is really that restoration is a winning ticket, and restoration is about hope. It's an agenda that's working, that's unfolding right now, and that we all have a role to step in and play in fulfilling this movement that has started.
And my message, and I actually hadn't thought about this, Supertrees offer a huge opportunity to create a sustainable future because they help us restore ecosystems, they help us protecting biodiversity, and they offer economic opportunities. So with that, please join me.
Congratulations and thanks to this wonderful set of presentations and panels. For those of you that have been with us from 9:30 this morning to this moment, I want to also congratulate you and thank you for being a part of today. Events like this happen because of the efforts of a whole wide range of people, so I want to acknowledge all of the hard work from the teams that have helped contribute to making today such a remarkable success. The events of today have all reinforced the notion that plants offer answers to today's environmental challenges. It's something that we at the New York Botanical Garden and our friends like those at the Bezos Earth Fund have long understood. It's gratifying to be among a growing chorus that is calling for collaboration and creativity in addressing the dual threats of biodiversity loss and climate change. Together, we will find our way to a greener future through nature. I hope you will leave today's conference feeling as inspired as I do, and thank you for being with us today.